He had always preferred the quiet life. After decades of living in the shadows, traveling to faraway lands and facing situations most people could never imagine, he had finally found a place he could call home. It was a small, modest house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by tall trees and wide green lawns. The streets were calm, and the neighbors kept to themselves, which suited him perfectly. He didn't need attention or friendship from everyone. He just needed peace, and for the first time in years he felt like he could breathe without tension gripping every muscle in his body. His days started early. He liked the way the sun touched the earth in the morning, painting the world in soft gold and orange shades. Before the rest of the neighborhood stirred, he would walk. But he was never alone. Always at his side was his loyal dog, a German shepherd who had been with him for more than a decade. The dog was strong, alert, and wise in ways that made him almost human. They had grown up together in a life that was never ordinary. Through firefights, dangerous missions, and tense moments where one wrong move meant death, the dog had been there. And now, in this quiet suburb, he was his constant companion, his friend, and his family. People often saw the man walking his dog along the sidewalks, moving at a slow, deliberate pace. The dog would sniff the grass, stretch, and occasionally look back to make sure he was still there. To the neighbors, it was just a man and his pet enjoying the morning. But there was something in the man's posture and the way he moved that was different. He wasn't tense like most people. He didn't rush. He didn't fidget or look around nervously. There was calm in him that seemed impossible for someone who had seen the things he had. The neighbors assumed it was just discipline or meditation. They had no idea of the truth. Inside the house, the routine was simple. Breakfast, some quiet moments reading or listening to soft music, and then work on personal projects. He had no interest in social media or the internet beyond what was necessary for the basics. His life was minimalistic not because he had to be, but because it suited him. He valued time and clarity over clutter and distraction. Even his home reflected this. Furniture was simple, functional, and neat. No flashy decorations, no unnecessary gadgets. Just what was needed for comfort and peace. His dog had a place near the window in the living room, where the sunlight came through in the morning. The man would sometimes sit across from him, sipping his coffee quietly and watch the dog stretch and yawn. It was a peaceful sight, yet there was an unspoken understanding between them. They both knew life could change in a second, even here, even now. The dog's ears would twitch at unusual sounds, and the man's eyes would follow every shadow. Years of experience had taught them both that calmness was precious but never to be taken for granted. Despite his calm exterior, there were moments when he would think about the past. The missions, the lives he had saved, the ones he couldn't. The faces of people who had been enemies or allies. The difficult choices that had weighed heavily on him. He never spoke about these things. Talking about them was unnecessary, even dangerous. Words could never capture the truth, and most people wouldn't understand. Even if they tried, it was impossible to explain the intensity of being responsible for so many lives, while being trained to act like any mistake could be the last. His connection with the dog was more than companionship. The dog had been trained alongside him in his previous life. Every gesture, every command, every look carried meaning. The dog could sense danger, fear, hesitation, even if it was buried deep inside. And he trusted the dog completely. In return, the dog trusted him to lead and protect without fail. It was a silent, mutual understanding that didn't require words, and it was something he had never experienced with any human being. Mornings like this were his sanctuary. Sometimes he would go for longer walks into the nearby woods, letting the dog explore trails lined with wildflowers and old trees. Other times he would sit on a bench near a small pond, watching birds skim the water's surface while the dog lay at his feet. There was nothing ordinary about these moments for him. They were rare gifts of normalcy, a pause in a life that had once been nothing but tension and danger. In the quiet, he allowed himself to relax, to feel the warmth of sunlight, and to remember that life didn't always have to be about survival. He was careful to keep his past hidden. Only a few close friends in his previous life knew his true identity, and even they understood that secrecy was essential. If anyone discovered the truth, it could bring trouble, unwanted attention, or even danger. Here, in this small neighborhood, he could just be a man with a dog, walking the streets, mowing the lawn, and enjoying mornings like this. There was freedom in anonymity, and he cherished it. On one such morning, he noticed a few neighbors starting their day. A man walked his small terrier down the street, waving politely. A woman on a bicycle passed by, smiling as the dog barked softly in greeting. Children played on a nearby lawn, their laughter ringing out. It was simple, ordinary life, and he felt a rare sense of connection with the world around him. Not because he needed attention or validation, but because seeing life continue, carefree, innocent, normal, reminded him why he had fought so hard in the past. It wasn't just about missions or duty. It was about protecting this kind of life for people who would never know the cost. Evenings followed a similar rhythm. After the walks, he would prepare a simple meal while the dog rested nearby. Sometimes he would read. Sometimes he would watch the news, though mostly he preferred silence. When the day was done, he would sit outside on the porch, letting the night air wash over him. Stars stretched across the sky like a silent promise, and the dog would lay next to him, occasionally lifting its head to sniff the wind. In these moments, he allowed himself to feel grateful. Grateful for life, for safety, for peace, things that had been scarce in his previous existence. Despite the calm, he remained vigilant. Years of training didn't simply disappear. He noticed every unusual sound, every car passing slowly, every shadow that seemed out of place. His neighbors never saw this side of him. To them, he was quiet, polite, normal. But inside, there was always awareness, always readiness. It was a balance he had perfected, living among ordinary people without revealing the extraordinary vigilance that had saved countless lives. The dog shared this awareness. Even in relaxation, it remained alert to the slightest disturbance. He had grown accustomed to the rhythm of this life, to the quiet joy of small moments. The smell of morning dew, the warmth of sunlight on the porch, the feel of the dog's fur under his hand, all of it grounded him in the present. There was no need to dwell on the past, though memories lingered at the edges of his mind. There was no need to worry about the future, though caution always whispered in the back of his thoughts. The present was enough, and he savored it like a rare treasure. But deep down, he knew life could be unpredictable. A quiet neighborhood could hide dangers as real as any battlefield, and mistakes could have devastating consequences. He had lived a life where one misstep meant death, and that knowledge never left him. He trusted no one completely, yet he trusted his dog implicitly. Together, they moved through life like shadows of calm and power, unnoticed yet fully prepared. Neighbors occasionally complimented him on his discipline, his calm demeanor, or the dog's intelligence. They had no idea how much training, experience, and hard choices had shaped both of them. To them, it was just a well-behaved dog and a quiet man. To him, it was a bond forged through fire, a lifeline that had carried him through situations most could never endure. Every glance, every gesture, every moment of attention was steeped in understanding, respect, and unspoken history. In this quiet life, he found solace. The past with all its chaos felt distant yet remained a part of him. The present with all its simplicity offered healing. And the dog, ever loyal and alert, was the bridge between these two worlds. The past that had tested him and the present that gave him peace. Together they moved through each day, aware of the world but not consumed by it, finding small joys in ordinary moments. He knew that one day life could change again. Danger was always possible, no matter how safe it seemed. But for now he had the mornings, the walks, the quiet companionship, and the rare sense of freedom that came with anonymity. And that was enough. He had finally found a place where he could just be a man and his dog, where every moment of calm was a victory, and every shared glance was a reminder of survival, loyalty, and love. And as they walked together under the early morning sun, the man and his dog moved in harmony, silent guardians of their small world, unaware of the events that would soon shatter this fragile peace. That afternoon, the quiet neighborhood was unsettled by an unexpected stir. A complaint had been made to the local police about a dog wandering near the streets. It was a concern for safety, they said. The officers responded quickly, believing it was a simple situation, nothing more. They did not know the man who lived in the small house at the corner, and they certainly had no idea that he was not just a regular resident. To them, it was just a complaint and a dog to handle. The dog, ever protective, sensed the strangers approaching. From the yard, it stood tall and alert, ears pricked, muscles taut. Its growl was low and deliberate, a warning for anyone who dared to come closer. The man, seeing the officers arrive, stepped outside calmly. He did not shout or make sudden movements. He had learned long ago that reacting with anger rarely solved anything, and it often escalated problems. But his heart sank when he realized what was about to happen. The officers, unfamiliar with the dog and its temperament, moved closer cautiously. They spoke in sharp, authoritative tones, expecting compliance, but the dog did not move. It did not threaten without cause. It simply stayed between them and its owner. The man tried to call it back using words and gestures he knew would calm it, but the situation was too tense. The dog sensed the fear and uncertainty, and instinctively, it held its ground. One of the officers made a sudden move, perhaps misreading the dog's position as aggressive, or perhaps responding to years of training that told them to act first and ask questions later. The sound of the gunshot tore through the air. Time seemed to slow for the man. His stomach dropped, his chest tightened, and he froze for a moment, staring at the lifeless body of his companion. The dog that had been with him through everything was gone in an instant. He rushed forward, hands trembling slightly, though his face remained composed. He knelt beside his dog, feeling the coldness where warmth had been moments before. The officers spoke quickly, trying to explain, to justify, but their words barely registered. He could hear them, but he did not respond. Not yet. His mind was calm, calculating, but underneath pain and grief roared. Years of training in the deadliest operations had never prepared him for this. It was one thing to face danger himself, but quite another to lose the one being who had never failed him, never wavered in loyalty. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and windows, murmuring in confusion and shock. They had never seen the man so upset, and none of them knew the full story. They did not know why his eyes, so still and calm before, now carried a weight they could not comprehend. He did not shout. He did not curse. He simply stared at the ground, at the dog that had shared his life. Every muscle in his body was tight, ready, but restrained. It was a control that had been honed over decades. The dog's death was sudden and unjust, and the man's grief was quiet, but fierce. He knew what had to be done first. Ensure the scene was safe, ensure no further mistakes occurred. He looked at the officers without anger in his voice, though his eyes held a warning they could not read. He motioned to step back. One of them obeyed hesitantly. Another seemed confused, trying to find words to explain the mistake. The man's presence was commanding, not through volume, but through control. It was a control earned through experience, through leadership, through life or death situations where hesitation could not be afforded. Once he assessed the immediate area, he returned to his dog. He felt the familiar fur, now still and lifeless. His fingers traced the contours as though memorizing every curve, every mark. The bond they had shared could not be erased by this one moment. But the absence was palpable, as if the entire world had shifted. He whispered softly, words that were more for himself than for anyone else, expressing the grief that could not be shouted or displayed in ordinary terms. The officers watched, realizing that this man was no ordinary resident. Something in the way he moved, in the silence that carried authority, unsettled them. He had to think, to act with clarity. Grief could not cloud judgment, especially now. He looked around the yard, noting every detail, every object that could matter later. He registered the officers' movements, their mannerisms, their possible missteps. Years of training in tense, hostile environments had conditioned him to notice everything, to anticipate threats and mistakes. The dog's death was a tragedy, but he could not allow chaos to follow it. The officers were in uncharted territory, unknowingly standing in front of someone who had mastered situations where lives depended on precision and control. He finally spoke, calmly, without raising his voice. He demanded accountability, facts, explanations. He asked what had led to this moment, what decisions were made, and why they had not assessed the situation properly. His words were measured, deliberate. There was no malice, only clarity. He did not scream or yell because he knew that calmness could achieve what anger could not. The officers, still shaken, fumbled to respond, aware that their mistake had caused immense damage. The quiet authority of the man made them uneasy. They realized, perhaps too late, that they had underestimated the situation, the man, and the bond that had been severed. Even as neighbors continued to watch, some stepping out to see the commotion, the man remained composed, attending to his dog, making decisions on how to handle what had occurred. The dog had been more than a pet. It had been a partner, a trusted ally. a silent guardian who had shared dangers that no ordinary person could imagine. Losing such a companion was a wound deeper than most could understand, and yet he carried it with the restraint that had defined him all his life. He instructed the officers to secure the area and gather information. He wanted no interference with the dog's resting place, no tampering with the environment. He moved with precision, ensuring that everything was documented accurately. Every small detail mattered, because he knew that what appeared to be a simple incident was far more complicated than anyone realized. There were layers here, history and training that could not be seen on the surface, and he needed to protect both truth and dignity. As the afternoon stretched on, he remained at the scene, refusing to let chaos take over. He spoke to witnesses with calm authority, asking for facts, observations, not interpretations. Each response was noted in his mind, each gesture registered. His grief was present, but it did not dominate him. That was not his way. Pain could be acknowledged without losing control. It could be experienced fully without letting it cloud judgment. He had learned that long ago in far harsher conditions, and the lesson had never left him. He remembered the first time he had faced loss in his previous life. It had been sudden, brutal, and unavoidable. The training, the experience, the discipline all taught him how to endure. How to act when grief was overwhelming. How to maintain clarity when everything screamed chaos. Today was no different in principle, though the context was painfully personal. He could not change the past, nor could he bring back the dog. But he could ensure that the truth of the event was recognized, that mistakes were acknowledged, and that accountability was established. The dog had been more than an animal. It had been a presence that brought stability, companionship, and trust. It had known when danger was near, had protected without hesitation, had been loyal beyond measure. Losing such a presence was like losing a part of himself. Yet he remained composed because that was what was necessary. He could not allow grief to cloud the clarity that his life required, nor could he let fear dominate where responsibility now fell on him. As the day progressed, he prepared for the inevitable questions, the scrutiny, the misunderstandings that would come from those who had no knowledge of his past. He had faced interrogations, hostile environments, and situations where the stakes were immeasurably high. This was different, but the principle was the same. Respond with clarity, maintain composure, and never let confusion or anger control the narrative. He had mastered the art of control in every life or death scenario, and now he applied the same skills to what might have seemed to others a simple, tragic incident. The officers began to grasp the weight of their error. Their eyes betrayed unease, a subtle recognition that this was no ordinary man, that this was someone shaped by experiences they could not fathom. His calm, deliberate movements, his quiet insistence on facts, his measured speech, all spoke of a life far beyond their own. They did not yet know the full story, and it terrified them in a way they could not articulate. He stayed at the scene long after the initial chaos had passed. He knelt by his dog, whispering memories, moments, gratitude. This was his way of honoring the bond they had shared. It was private, solemn, and filled with the depth of emotion that words could never capture. Every gesture was deliberate, every motion considered, every pause meaningful. To any observer, it might have seemed excessive, almost ritualistic, but it was the way he processed loss, and with attention, respect, and clarity. By the time evening approached, the situation had settled into tense quiet. The officers had left with reports to file, questions to answer, and a mistake they could not undo. The man remained, carrying grief in silence, honoring the dog's memory. He had acted with restraint. He had demanded truth, and he had maintained composure in a situation that could have spiraled into chaos. It was a display of control, authority, and humanity all at once, a reflection of a life shaped by extremes, now navigating tragedy in the smallest, quietest ways. That day marked the end of a chapter, though he did not yet know how it would affect the future. The loss was personal, profound, and irrevocable, yet the way he carried it with dignity and clarity revealed a strength few could imagine. The officers may have thought they were handling a routine complaint, but they had stumbled into a life forged in fire, discipline, and loyalty. And in the stillness that followed the tragedy, the man and his dog's memory became a testament to bonds that transcended ordinary understanding, a silent reminder of loyalty, love, and the cost of misunderstanding. After the officers left, The man stayed in the yard long into the night. The streetlights cast soft pools of yellow light on the pavement, and the shadows of the trees danced gently in the wind. He knelt beside where his dog had fallen, not moving, not speaking much, simply breathing with slow, controlled rhythm. The grief was heavy, pressing against his chest like a physical weight, but he did not allow it to overwhelm him. Years of discipline had taught him that even in moments of immense pain, clarity must remain. He had survived chaos before, and now he faced a personal battlefield unlike any other. The neighborhood was quiet, yet alive with the small sounds of life: distant cars, the murmur of a few neighbors, the occasional bark of a dog far away. He noticed every sound, every movement, every subtle shift in the air. Though his grief was deep, his instincts remained sharp. The officer's mistake had brought tragedy, but he needed to ensure that nothing further could go wrong. Even in this quiet place, vigilance was a constant companion. He had lived a life where threats could appear in an instant, and that training never faded. He thought about his dog, the bond they had shared, the unspoken understanding between them. This dog had been more than a companion. It had been a partner, a protector, a confidant. It had been present during his darkest times, always steady, always alert, always loyal. Now its absence left an emptiness that words could not fill. He traced the familiar contours of its fur one last time, memorizing the shape, the feel, the presence that had been a constant in his life. The loss was profound, but he honored it with quiet strength. Memories of past missions and operations surfaced. Each memory was a reminder of survival, of strategy, of discipline under pressure. But unlike those memories, this loss was personal and irreplaceable. In the field, losses were expected, often anonymous and part of the mission's reality. Here, the loss was intimate, raw, and unavoidable. The dog had been a part of his daily life, a presence that had offered comfort and trust beyond measure. It was no longer there, and he felt the weight of that absence deeply. He decided to prepare a resting place for his dog in the yard. He wanted it to be peaceful, dignified, and calm, a small sanctuary that reflected the bond they had shared. Using his hands and tools from the shed, he dug a hole beneath the old oak tree, where the sunlight would fall in the morning and the wind would rustle the leaves softly overhead. It was a simple act, but it carried the gravity of love, respect, and ritual. He handled each motion carefully, as if each movement was a silent message to the dog, a promise that its life had meaning and honor. Neighbors watched from a distance, some stepping cautiously closer, some remaining behind curtains. They whispered among themselves, unsure how to interpret what they were seeing. To them it was a quiet man burying a pet. To him it was a solemn ceremony of loyalty, recognition, and grief. Every movement was deliberate, every pause intentional. He did not rush because rushing would dishonor what the dog had represented. He stayed fully present, fully aware, fully engaged with the task and the emotions it carried. As the earth covered the dog, he spoke softly. The words were not for anyone else. They were for himself and for the memory of the dog. He recalled moments from their life together. Mornings in the yard, walks in the woods, quiet evenings on the porch. Missions past where the dog had been an unseen guardian. Each memory brought a sting of pain, but also a quiet sense of gratitude. The bond they had shared was unbroken, even in death. Night fell fully, and the stars came out in a vast display of quiet brilliance. He stood beside the small mound, feeling the cool night air on his skin. He took a deep breath, centering himself, allowing the calm to return. The grief remained, but it had shifted from a crushing weight to a quiet ache. He had acknowledged it, honored it, and found a way to carry it without losing control. This was the way he had lived his life, facing danger, loss, and uncertainty with composure, and finding strength in clarity and discipline. In the days that followed, he continued his routine, though the absence of his companion was always present. Walks were quieter, mornings slower, evenings lonelier, but he did not allow despair to take hold. He engaged with the world around him with awareness, appreciating small details that might have been overlooked before. The chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves, the laughter of children playing. Each sound reminded him that life continued, fragile yet persistent, and that he had a role in maintaining awareness, vigilance, and care. The incident with the officers had created a ripple in the neighborhood. Some neighbors spoke quietly about the man and the tragedy that had occurred. They speculated, asked questions, and tried to understand what had happened. They had no idea who he truly was, and they could not comprehend the depth of his training, experience, or discipline. To them, he was simply a quiet man enduring a difficult moment. They did not see the layers of life that had shaped him, nor the skill and restraint that allowed him to navigate even the most emotional events with composure. The man reflected on the officers' actions and their mistake. He did not act out of anger or vengeance, though the impulse existed. Instead, he chose clarity, strategy, and observation. He knew that emotions left unchecked could lead to more mistakes, more chaos. He studied the scenario, mentally noting details, patterns, and behavior. This was not about punishment. It was about understanding, awareness, and ensuring accountability in a way that maintained integrity. His bond with the dog remained central to his experience. Every movement, every thought, every plan he considered carried the memory of that loyal companion. The dog had been more than a pet. It had been a constant presence, a teacher, a mirror of loyalty and trust. Its life had shaped his own in subtle but profound ways, and its death left a space that could never be filled by anything else. Yet he carried on, honoring the connection through his actions, his discipline, and his awareness of the world. As the week progressed, he encountered the officers briefly when they returned to gather statements and details. They were nervous, cautious, and aware that they had made a grave error. The man spoke calmly, asking questions, seeking clarity, and listening carefully. He did not raise his voice or make threats. His presence alone carried weight, a silent reminder that experience, skill, and understanding were not to be underestimated. The officers sensed, perhaps instinctively, that they were in front of someone whose life had been defined by mastery over danger and chaos. They left with a mixture of respect, fear, and confusion. The neighborhood began to adjust to the quiet after the incident, though whispers persisted. Some neighbors wondered what kind of man lived there, why the dog had been so fiercely protective, and what had happened that day. They did not understand that the man had led a life of unimaginable intensity, that he had faced dangers far beyond their imagination, and that his composure in tragedy was not just restraint, but the result of years of discipline and experience. The man himself continued to walk the streets with care, noting every detail of his surroundings. The absence of the dog was still felt, a silent reminder of loss and love. Yet he moved with purpose, maintaining routine and finding moments of peace in the small details of life. He tended his garden, repaired small parts of the house, and engaged in quiet reflection. These actions grounded him, provided structure, and honored the memory of his companion. He began to notice subtle changes in himself. The grief had shifted, becoming a steady companion rather than a crushing force. He found clarity in sorrow, understanding in loss, and discipline in mourning. Every morning he would pause to acknowledge the absence, to remember the loyalty, and to carry the lessons forward. In this he found a strange form of peace. The dog was gone, but its presence lingered in his life through memory, reflection, and continued vigilance. As days turned into weeks, he maintained his calm exterior while attending to the emotional undercurrents within. He watched neighbors, listened carefully, and learned to interpret behaviors with subtle observation. His training had taught him that awareness was key to survival, and now he applied the same principles to life in the neighborhood. Though the stakes were not life and death in the traditional sense, the principles of clarity, observation, and understanding remained the same. He also began to prepare for the wider implications of the incident. He knew that eventually, people would want explanations, answers, and accountability. He could not allow misinformation to spread or emotions to dictate outcomes. He had experienced countless situations where clarity and calm could change the outcome dramatically, and he intended to apply that knowledge now. Every step, every interaction, every decision was deliberate, thoughtful, and measured. At night, he would sit on the porch where he and his dog had spent many evenings. The stars stretched across the sky, constant and distant. He allowed himself to feel the ache of absence, to remember the moments they had shared, and to reflect on the lessons learned. In this quiet, he found a strange combination of sorrow, strength, and gratitude. The bond they had shared remained unbroken even in death, and that connection provided a foundation for him to move forward. The memory of the dog was a constant, guiding his actions, his decisions, and his awareness. Each day he honored that memory through routine, vigilance, and discipline. He spoke to no one about the depth of his grief because words were inadequate. and he did not need external validation. The bond, the loyalty, and the love existed independently of recognition. It was a private truth, a personal reality that shaped his every action, his every thought. Through this process, the man demonstrated the remarkable ability to navigate tragedy with control, grace, and humanity. His actions were deliberate, his emotions acknowledged but contained, and his presence commanding even in the absence of words. He was a man shaped by extraordinary experiences, yet fully capable of experiencing profound personal loss. In this quiet neighborhood, in this unremarkable yard, he showed the depth of loyalty, love, and discipline that had defined his life and would continue to guide him. Days passed after the tragic incident, and the quiet neighborhood began to feel a subtle tension. The man continued his routines, walking the streets in the mornings and evenings, but now his presence seemed different. His movements carried a weight, an awareness that was sharper, more deliberate. The officer's mistake had sparked a chain of consequences, and though the man had remained calm and composed, he knew that the truth would eventually come to light. He could sense it, as always, before it happened. It started with a simple phone call. One of the officers, still shaken by the incident, had run a background check on the man. What they discovered was startling. This was no ordinary resident. His past was shrouded in secrecy, classified to levels most people could not even imagine. He had served in operations far beyond the understanding of local law enforcement, in places where life and death depended on split-second decisions. The recognition of his true identity sent ripples of fear and respect through the department. They had unknowingly confronted someone who had led elite missions, someone whose experience was beyond measure. The man, however, remained silent. He did not seek to make his past known, that life had been dangerous and exposure could bring more complications. Yet the officers and authorities could not ignore what they had found. Higher officials became involved, reviewing reports, conducting investigations, and trying to understand the full scope of the situation. The incident had escalated from a local tragedy to something far more serious, and it required careful handling. The man understood the scrutiny was coming, but he did not let it disturb his focus. He continued his routines, disciplined and deliberate, aware of every step, every glance, every movement around him. The officers who had caused the incident were filled with regret, unease, and confusion. They realized that their actions had unknowingly provoked someone with extraordinary skills, someone whose composure in crisis was the result of decades of training and experience. They began to understand that this was not simply about a dog or a routine complaint. They had intruded upon a life that demanded respect, a life where control, awareness, and discipline were paramount. Their error had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate neighborhood. In the quiet of his home, the man reflected on the situation. He had always understood that human errors were inevitable, that mistakes could have devastating consequences. What mattered most was how one responded afterward, with calm, clarity, and a focus on resolving the problem without causing further harm. He did not dwell on anger or revenge. Those emotions were tools to be used when necessary, not defaults to guide behavior. Instead, he focused on understanding the implications, ensuring accountability, and maintaining integrity. He spent hours reviewing the events in his mind, reconstructing every moment from the approach of the officers to the fatal shot. He analyzed body language, choices made, timing, and reactions. Every detail mattered. This was not just about the dog anymore. It was about ensuring that mistakes were recognized, that responsibility was taken seriously, and that the situation would not escalate further. His mind worked with precision, separating emotion from fact, grief from strategy. It was a skill honed over decades in the most extreme circumstances. Authorities began to reach out, seeking meetings, explanations, and cooperation. The man received them calmly, speaking in measured tones, providing the facts of what had happened and insisting on accountability. He did not accuse, he did not yell, he did not make threats. His presence, his calm, and his authority carried weight without the need for aggression. Those who interacted with him sensed immediately that they were dealing with someone whose experience and understanding far surpassed their own. His reputation, though unknown to most, preceded him in subtle, undeniable ways. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued its routines, unaware of the full depth of what had occurred. People speculated, whispered, and observed, but they could not comprehend the man's history, the depth of his skill, or the discipline that guided his every action. They only saw a quiet, composed man responding to tragedy with dignity. What they did not see was the life lived in shadows, the missions executed in secrecy, and the countless decisions made in situations of extreme danger. The man began to prepare for the possibility that the incident could attract media attention. Though he preferred privacy, he understood the need for careful communication and control of information. He meticulously planned responses, considered phrasing, anticipated questions, and ensured that his statements would be clear, measured, and accurate. This was not about public image or ego. It was about maintaining order, truth, and respect in a situation fraught with potential misunderstanding and sensationalism. Evenings remained a time of reflection and remembrance. He would sit on the porch where he had spent so many nights with his dog, watching the stars, feeling the cool breeze, and thinking about the life that had been lost. The grief was still there, but it had transformed into something more sustainable, a quiet companion that reminded him of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. The dog's memory was a guiding force, influencing how he approached each day, each interaction, each decision. It was a presence that could not be erased, a constant in the midst of uncertainty. The officers, now fully aware of the man's identity and background, approached the situation with caution and respect. They communicated carefully, mindful of both their mistake and the reality that they were dealing with someone trained to handle crises far beyond their experience. Their initial fear shifted to a form of respect, a recognition of the gravity of the error and the skill of the man before them. They realized that accountability, honesty, and humility were essential, not only to resolve the situation, but also to ensure that future interactions would not result in further tragedy. Over time, the man began to take small steps to reclaim a sense of normalcy. He tended to his home, cared for the garden, walked the streets with awareness, and engaged with neighbors in measured, polite ways. He did not broadcast his history or identity, but he carried the lessons and skills of his past into each action. His life had always been defined by discipline, vigilance, and clarity, and now those principles guided him through personal loss and public scrutiny alike. He also began to document the incident and its aftermath in private. Notes, observations, timelines, and reflections were recorded with precision, not for anyone else to read, but to ensure his own understanding and clarity. He had learned over decades that clarity of thought and meticulous attention to detail could prevent mistakes, manage complex situations, and preserve integrity. This exercise provided focus and purpose, helping him process grief while preparing for any potential developments. As the investigation continued, he remained patient and composed. Questions were answered carefully, facts were presented accurately, and misunderstandings were corrected with calm authority. He did not seek to humiliate the officers or punish them personally. His goal was truth, accountability, and prevention of future errors. His demeanor, controlled and precise, left a lasting impression on all who interacted with him. They sensed the presence of someone whose life had been shaped by extremes, yet who now navigated tragedy with measured care and humanity. At night, he would sit quietly, reflecting on the dog, the neighborhood, and the human responses that had brought this situation to light. He understood that mistakes were part of life, that grief was unavoidable, and that clarity of thought could guide resolution. The dog's memory remained central, a reminder of loyalty, love, and the cost of error. It was a presence that shaped not only his emotions but also his approach to justice, responsibility, and human interaction. The man realized that this incident had revealed more than just the officer's mistake. It had revealed the depth of his own resilience, discipline, and capacity for calm under pressure. Grief, loss, and tragedy were forces that could destroy or refine. He had chosen refinement, using the situation to demonstrate clarity, awareness, and measured response. His identity, though hidden from most, now influenced the course of the events in subtle but powerful ways. Authorities continued to process the event, but the man's composed handling of the situation set a tone of professionalism, accountability, and dignity. Every action he took, every decision he made was influenced by his training, his experience, and his humanity. He had faced countless crises in his life, but this personal loss brought a different kind of challenge, one that required emotional control, strategic thinking, and moral clarity. He met it with the same strength and focus that had defined him throughout his extraordinary life. The neighborhood slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, though whispers remained. People noticed the man's composed demeanor, the quiet presence, and the careful way he moved through his world. They did not know the history, but they sensed the gravity of his character. To them, he was a figure of calm authority, someone who had endured grief with dignity. To him, the dog's memory and the lessons from his past continued to guide every choice, every interaction, and every moment of reflection. Through it all, the man maintained his routine, his vigilance, and his connection to the world around him. He honored the dog's life through remembrance, through careful action, and through discipline. He understood that strength was not measured in aggression or retaliation, but in the ability to act with clarity, calm, and integrity even in the face of loss. The dog's absence was felt deeply, yet it inspired a form of resilience that carried him forward, steady and unwavering. By the end of the part of the week, he had managed to balance grief and presence, loss and action, memory and discipline. He had navigated the aftermath with intelligence, patience, and humanity, and though the neighborhood would never know the full depth of his past, they saw the evidence of character and strength in his actions, in his calm demeanor, and in the respect he commanded quietly. In every choice, in every reflection, in every step, he carried both the memory of his loyal companion and the principles that had defined his extraordinary life, preparing for whatever might come next. Weeks passed since the incident, and the neighborhood began to settle back into its quiet rhythm. Yet a tension lingered. People spoke in hushed tones about what had happened, about the quiet man who had lost his dog. They did not know the depth of his past, the extraordinary life he had led, or the skills that had defined him. To them he remained calm, composed, and polite. But there was an unspoken understanding in the air that something profound had occurred. He, however, was focused not on gossip, not on recognition, but on navigating the aftermath with dignity and clarity. He spent his mornings walking the familiar streets, observing the neighborhood with a quiet vigilance that had become instinctive. Every movement of a person, every sound of a vehicle, every small change in the environment registered in his mind. Years of high-stakes experience had taught him to notice the smallest details, and though the threat was different here, the practice remained the same. The loss of his dog had reminded him that even in peaceful surroundings, awareness was a necessity. Life could shift in an instant, and he could not allow complacency. Evenings were the hardest. He would sit on the porch staring at the stars, recalling memories with his loyal companion. Every shared glance, every walk, every moment spent together played in his mind with clarity. The dog had been a constant in a life full of danger, uncertainty, and change. Losing that presence left a space that could never be filled. Yet he drew strength from the memory, using it to guide his actions, to reinforce the discipline and composure that had carried him through decades of extraordinary challenges. News of his background reached local authorities and eventually made its way into more formal channels. Investigations were thorough, but they were handled with care, respect, and discretion. His past, classified and sensitive, required precise management, and he approached it with the same strategic thinking that had guided him in countless missions. He ensured that communication was clear, factual, and controlled. There was no need for sensationalism or public attention. Accuracy and integrity were paramount, and he navigated every interaction with authority and poise. The officers involved were deeply affected by the revelation. They realized the magnitude of their error, not just in causing the loss of a loyal companion, but in underestimating the man before them. Respect and caution replaced their initial fear, and they approached subsequent interactions with careful consideration. They understood that accountability was not about punishment alone, but about acknowledging mistakes, learning, and ensuring such an incident could not happen again. The man's composed handling of the situation made a lasting impression, demonstrating that strength could manifest without aggression through clarity, calm, and thoughtful action. As the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, he continued his routines incorporating reflection, remembrance, and small acts of care. He tended his home and garden, engaged in walks and observation, and maintained interactions with neighbors in polite, measured ways. He did not need recognition or validation. His purpose was rooted in discipline, principle, and memory. Each act carried significance, a silent tribute to his lost companion, a demonstration of resilience, and a commitment to clarity in every interaction. He began documenting the incident and the aftermath in private, recording observations, timelines, and reflections. This practice provided structure, clarity, and a sense of control, helping him process grief and prepare for any potential developments. Notes were meticulous, detailed, and precise, reflecting the discipline honed over decades. The act of writing became a ritual, a way to honor his companion, maintain awareness, and reinforce the clarity that guided every decision. The dog's absence remained a quiet presence in his life. Its memory influenced how he approached daily routines, interactions with others, and his understanding of responsibility. Loyalty, vigilance, and love had been constants in their shared life, and they continued to guide him. He spoke to no one of the depth of his grief, for it was private and personal. Instead, he carried it silently, allowing it to shape his decisions, his focus, and his sense of duty. Occasionally, the officers returned for clarification, to ensure that reports were accurate, and to discuss the chain of events. He responded with calm authority, providing details with clarity and precision. There was no anger or malice, only a steady insistence on truth and responsibility. His presence, quiet yet commanding, reinforced the seriousness of the situation. The officers, aware of their error and the extraordinary nature of the man they had encountered, approached with respect and care. Each interaction was handled with thoughtful consideration, reflecting the man's skill in navigating tense situations. Even in his solitude, he found moments of connection with the world around him. The neighborhood continued to breathe with ordinary life. Children playing, birds singing, neighbors walking and talking. Each small detail became meaningful, a reminder of the peace he had fought to protect, both in his past and in the present. He observed with awareness, appreciating the ordinary yet never losing sight of the vigilance that had always been part of him. The dog's memory infused these moments with quiet significance, a reminder that loyalty, trust, and love were worth preserving. He reflected on the broader implications of the incident. Life, even in its most peaceful moments, could be unpredictable. People made mistakes, sometimes with irreversible consequences. Grief, loss, and misunderstanding were constants of human existence. What mattered most was how one responded. His response, composed, measured, and disciplined, demonstrated that strength and clarity could shape outcomes, even in the wake of tragedy. The dog's life had taught him lessons that extended far beyond companionship, influencing his approach to accountability, awareness, and integrity. The weeks following the incident were marked by subtle transformation. He moved through his world with heightened clarity, balancing grief with discipline, reflection with action. He navigated interactions with neighbors and authorities with measured care, maintaining privacy while ensuring accountability. His life became a testament to resilience, the ability to honor loss without being consumed by it, and the power of disciplined presence in guiding human action. One evening, he walked to the small oak tree where he had buried his dog. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it a sense of quiet continuity. He placed his hand on the earth, closing his eyes for a moment of reflection. Memories flowed, walks through quiet streets, mornings filled with sunlight, evenings spent in peaceful companionship. Though the dog was gone, its presence remained in memory, shaping his actions, grounding his thoughts, and influencing the way he moved through the world. It was a silent connection, unbroken by time or circumstance. He realized that the incident had revealed much more than human error. It had revealed the depth of his own resilience, the power of discipline, and the capacity to navigate tragedy with clarity and composure. Strength was not measured by aggression or retaliation, but by the ability to act with integrity, awareness, and patience. The dog's memory, the lessons of past experiences, and the principles that had guided him through extraordinary circumstances continued to inform his life, ensuring that he moved forward with purpose, dignity, and quiet strength.